Hello. One of the aspects that I would like to touch upon in this particular video is the evolution of evaluation of information system security in organizations. When I say evaluation, I'm really referring to the evaluation criteria that had been around and have taken different shapes and forms to our current times. I would like to go back into how the Department of Defense used to evaluate their vendors. So they had to have a mechanism in place where vendor A could be compared to vendor B, and then the Department of Defense could have a trust mechanism that they would trust vendor A over vendor B. So they had to come up with some kind of criteria to evaluate these vendors. And they used some mathematical concepts which are grounded in the Bell-LaPadula model of confidentiality and also certain other systems to create these kind of levels of trust that they would have with vendors. One criteria that came into being was the Trusted Computer Systems Evaluation Criteria, or the TCSEC, or the Orange Book as it came to be known. So when Orange Book was produced, it was really classifying different vendors and their systems along certain dimensions and said, you know, if you fall in a certain category, then I'm going to trust you more than the other vendor. Now, since the Department of Defense and the US was obviously trading with its European partners and Canada and elsewhere, those countries also came up with their own evaluation criteria. Canadians had their own, the Europeans had their own, which was called the Green Book. The British had their own. So all these criteria came together and they were very disparate and all over the place in a sense. The European one that came into being was the ITSEC, the Green Book, the Information Technology Security Evaluation Criteria, where they were classifying their vendors in certain ways, but essentially they were all mapping onto one another in one shape or form. And these books that came around, and then the International Standards Organization, what they did was they said, okay, you know, this is too confusing. Let's put these standards together into some kind of a common form which everybody can then understand. So around came the common criteria. So the common criteria are what we know of today in one. They have evolved over a period of time, of course, and they are now an international standard, but these are the criteria that have been around, which essentially help in managing and vetting different vendors as to how they are performing and how much trust we should have in their place. An important element that goes with this whole notion of Trusted Computer Systems Evaluation Criteria, or the Green Book or the Orange Books of the world, and the common criteria as they are known today, is a very important element of trust. That is central to this whole notion of these evaluation criteria. And that notion of trust is, how well am I going to trust a corresponding vendor, right? Now, around comes blockchain today, which is essentially a peer-to-peer trust mechanism, which may not necessarily have been adopted as well in the Defense Department and the secure systems communication, but it's an infrastructure, it's a technology which allows us to do some of those very interesting things in a more innovative manner. So going forward, I do believe that blockchain technologies and the peer-to-peer trust mechanisms that we have come to know today are going to have a very interesting impact on how the TCSECs and the ITSECs of the past and their evolution into common criteria today will get shaped in years to come. That's going to be a very interesting development for all of us to see as to what the potential is going to be of these newer emergent technologies. Another element that is very interesting and which kind of links the newer emergent technologies such as blockchain technologies with the older evaluation criteria is the very nature of the organization. So when originally these TCSECs and the ITSECs and the common criteria were thought about, they considered organizations in terms of hierarchical enterprises, which means that essentially if you are in the military or the army, you are really conforming to a command and control kind of a structure. So TCSECs and the ITSECs and the common criteria worked very well because you had defined levels of control. But as we move into more commercial organizations which have become more flatter in nature, the old models do not necessarily translate into the current environment. So there is some rethinking that needs to be done. I always talk about this whole notion of a well-formed formula. So when you create these conceptual models, such as these evaluation criteria, which are based on a certain logic, then the context changes. Then that particular conceptual model, logical model, no longer remains a well-formed formula. So essentially, the requirements for the newer model have to be derived again from the context within which it is originally developed. So because that has changed. So as a result, the trust that we place in these models over a period of time as context changes also gets questioned. So some food for thought around these interesting elements, which we don't have a particular answer for these as to how these models will evolve and what will happen, but there's some food for thought as newer technologies are coming, which are questioning the way in which the world is functioning. The flatter nature of the organizations is going to pose certain interesting challenges. But those are some interesting things that we need to be thinking about in terms of models and specifying our security requirements as we go on into the new millennium. Thank you.